What if I told you the strongest warriors in history grew up in a world that was actually kind of scary? Not like the movies. Not slow-motion battles and cool speeches. The real Spartans lived in a way that might surprise you. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why their strength came from something much darker than you think. Let's get into it. Most people imagine Spartans as heroes, brave fighters who never gave up. But the truth is, Sparta wasn't really about freedom. It was about control. In Sparta, your whole life was planned for you from the moment you were born. What you learned, how you acted, what your future would be. And if you didn't fit their idea of strong, you didn't belong. That sounds harsh, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Sparta didn't just make strong warriors with training. They used fear. Even babies in Sparta were judged. When a baby was born, a group of elders would check the child carefully. They were looking for strength. If they believed the baby was too weak or unhealthy, the baby was left behind. Imagine growing up in a place where only the strongest were allowed to live. That's not just strict, it's intense. But surviving as a baby was only the first step. Because life got much harder as you grew older. At just 7 years old, boys were taken away from their families. No more staying with parents. No more normal childhood. They were sent to a special training system called the agoge. And it was very tough. The boys didn't get enough food, so they had to steal to survive. But if they got caught, they were punished. Not because stealing was wrong, but because they weren't smart enough to avoid getting caught. Think about that. They were being trained to be clever, sneaky, and strong at the same time. They also had to live with very little comfort. They slept on hard beds made from reeds. They wore simple clothes, even in cold weather. All of this was meant to make them tougher. But here's where things get even more serious. Pain wasn't something to avoid in Sparta. It was something to get used to. Boys were sometimes punished in front of others and expected not to cry. Because crying meant weakness. And weakness was not allowed. Imagine being a child and learning that you're not supposed to show pain. That changes how you think. That changes who you become. But the darkest part of Sparta isn't just how they treated their own people. It's how they treated others. Sparta depended on a group of people called the Helots. The Helots were enslaved people who did all the farming and hard work. There were many more Helots than Spartans. And the Spartans were afraid of them. So they used fear to stay in control. Sometimes, young Spartan boys were sent out at night to harm Helots as part of their training. That's not just harsh. That's terrifying. But from the Spartan point of view, it was a way to stay safe. They believed that if the Helots were scared enough, they wouldn't fight back. So even though Spartans looked fearless on the outside, they were actually living with fear on the inside. Always watching. Always worried. Now here's something surprising. Spartan women had more freedom than women in many other places at that time. They could run, exercise, and even own land. They could speak their opinions more openly too. That sounds pretty modern, right? But there was a reason behind it. Spartan women were expected to stay strong so they could have strong children. Everything in Sparta, even how women lived, was about creating better soldiers. It wasn't about fairness. It was about building strength for the state. For a while, this system worked. Spartan soldiers became famous for being strong, brave, and highly trained. They fought together like a team and trusted each other completely. Other people respected them. And many feared them. But here's where things start to change. Sparta had one big problem. They didn't like change. They believed their way was the best way. So they didn't try new ideas. They didn't adapt when the world around them changed. And over time, other groups started to do things differently. They trained in new ways. They used new strategies. They became more flexible. And slowly, those groups became stronger than Sparta. Because being strong is important. But being able to learn and change is even more important. Sparta didn't fall all at once. There was no single moment where everything ended. Instead, it faded away slowly. Its population became smaller. Its system became harder to keep running. And eventually, it lost its power. But even though Sparta disappeared, its story didn't. Today, we still talk about Spartans. We still admire their strength and discipline. We still watch movies about them. But we don't always talk about the full truth. Because the truth is complicated. Yes, Spartans were strong. Yes, they were skilled warriors. But their strength came from a system that was very strict, very harsh, and often very unfair. They gave up freedom. They gave up comfort. And in many ways, they gave up kindness. So this brings us back to the big question. Were Spartans great warriors? Yes, they were. But was their way of life something we would want today? Probably not. Because real strength isn't just about being tough. It's also about being kind. It's about being fair. And it's about being able to grow and change when needed. If there's one thing to remember, it's this: Sparta was powerful, but that power came at a big cost. And not every kind of strength is something we should admire. If you found this interesting, you'll love the next video about Roman soldiers. They trained in a completely different way, and it might surprise you. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.